Greetings to everybody. We are here for the 27th Intergenerational meeting with a guest, a member of our seed. I will leave the floor to Ramin to moderate the meeting. Welcome everybody, let me say.
Ma moramo se vremena vremena biti. To će ova mlada devojka pisati kako je postala psihijatar.
Okay, very warm welcome to everyone who's tuning in and those who are in the Zoom call as well. And very happy Lunar New Year to those who are celebrating, if there are any among us. It brings me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. She is an old friend of Seed. She was one of the early student members when Seed was first established. And it brings me great pleasure to announce that she's currently a psychiatry resident in Yale, if I'm correct. So yeah, without further ado, I think all of the aspiring psychiatrists are eager to hear from you, Dr. Idil.
Thank you so much, Ramin. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's 2 a.m. right now at where I am, and just seeing you all after a very long time makes me forget all about Dad. As Ramin said, I joined Seed as while I was not still a student, but I had just graduated by Dr. Joshkun's invitation, I think back in 2021. And back then, I was in a period of my life where there were a lot of uncertainties towards the future, and I was still trying to find my direction. And throughout this, couple of years, I have found some parts of that direction, I would say, or at least some direction. And Seed has been such a great part of that journey. So it means a lot to be here again. It had been a while. And I just want to also say that I'm very proud of all the work that the newer members have been doing. And even though I'm not able to I haven't been able to actively participate in a lot of things, it's been a pleasure to just observe it from a side. But I also don't want to, I also want to make sure that this meeting was as informal as it could be so that, I could answer a lot of questions and share a lot regarding my journey. So I just want to start with the title that we kind of came up with this, which is with this for this meeting, which is kind of like a generic title in a way. I actually put a lot of thought into, whether finding a topic or whether we should talk about something more niche or specific. But then I realized that, medicine and as physicians, being in training and learning and becoming things is actually a lifelong journey. So I came up with this title, Becoming a Psychiatrist and Reflections from the Beginning of a Journey. But it also made me, realize that this is not the first beginning I'm experiencing as a, first year resident at Yale. And it will most certainly, hopefully, will not be the last beginning I will experience. And that is something that I have come to really value about being a physician is that we have the chance, it's I would say blessing and a curse at the same time, but we have the chance to be new at what we're doing for a very long time. And we have the chance to, start again and again and again and at different parts of our journey for a very long time. And I guess a couple of years ago when I first graduated and I felt like I had spent a very good time in training, and I was like maybe somewhat burned out. It felt very intimidating to me to, look towards a life path that I will be constantly in training and constantly be new in different places. Uh, that I would end up in. But then I had this conversation with one of my professors back in Ege University. And I think it was just a conversation we were having while we were outside of a seminar that they were giving. And she was talking about the research projects she was trying to have her team do, or like the grants that they were applying. And she's very experienced. So I asked her, like, how do you not get burned out? Like, how do you do this with this passion after so many more years? Uh, because again, it was around the time that I was, trying to find my own path and wasn't sure about some things. And she told me, it's not that I don't get burned out after, doing this for so long, is that I don't get burned out because I have been doing this for so long. And she basically like walked me through that being, younger or having quote unquote more energy doesn't always mean that you're stronger. And actually, strength and resilience is something, as an educator and as a physician, is something that you build as you get more experience, as you, go through the trials and tribulations of life, as you become comfortable with being new and learning new things. So that's gave me a great paradigm shift on how I looked at my potential and the potential of everyone else around me, is that it's not something that we have at 100% when we are like youngest, and then we kind of use it through as we go through life, but it's rather something that we build, and it actually improves and gets better as we also learn more through life. So I noticed that I kind of went on a bit of a tangent there, but I just wanted to mention this because I think in training, especially in like this early years, that we are still trying to figure out what path is the right for us, and what to take, or even how to do it, or even whether, seeing we are up to it or not. Things can be very intimidating, and we can feel really lost, or this we can have this like fear of missing out, or the fear that we had missed out certain opportunities and they will not come back. And I just want to, give that message out there. Like, if you are in, I would say, in our like situation, or in your early days as a doctor, or in your late days as a medical student, and if the future seems intimidating, or if you feel like you had not done enough, um, or if you feel like you had done too much and don't feel like you don't want to do anything else, I just want to validate this feeling, because I definitely thought when I was first feeling these things that it was like I was alone in this. But one great part of this whole journey, finding psychiatry, deciding to do residency in the US, getting into residency in the US, and just going through those hurdles and trials and tribulations, it made me realize I was definitely not alone and struggling in this journey. So I just wanted to convey that message out there. So just to also go through like some of the things, some more uh, solid things that I had done, so that maybe you can ask questions, or just bring up other discussion points. Um, so that's the initial message that I wanted to share. And I would say that it's kind of like the most important takeaway I would want anyone to have from this meeting. But basically, just to talk a bit more about myself, I graduated in 2021 from Ege University, which is located in Izmir, Turkey. It's a lovely Mediterranean city. I highly recommend if you haven't been there before. And in university, which is also med school for our colleagues in the US, it's the same thing in Turkey. Um, I was very interested in generally medicine and human rights education and medical education. And my interest in psychiatry actually came secondary to that. So in university and med school, I got involved in this organization called the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, which is basically, every country has their own medical student association. And when 120 countries come together, they built up this federation. And I got involved in that. And I was eventually the human rights director of that federation. And while working there, just working on human rights made me realize the importance of mental health, like just the intersections that human rights and mental health have, how, structural inequalities or human rights violations could jeopardize one's mental health, but also put people who already have mental illness in greater jeopardy. On top of that, there were also issues with access to healthcare or human rights within mental health care. So those kind of like initial inspirations came to me as I was working with this organization, that mental health is an area that I would like to, or I could work in. But truly, I would say what's changed things for me was my clerkship in medical school, which was the first time in a while. And I don't mean to bash my other clerkships or other professors, but I would say my psychiatric clerkship was the first time that I felt so intellectually stimulated in medical school. Like all the lectures that I sat in or all the clinical experience that I was a part of, it just felt like I could do this forever. But I wasn't set to psychiatry then still. What truly, made me decide was I realized that I'm a medical student. When I was a medical student, I was interested in everything. And I think that's great because it is a certain indication of curiosity. And that's the whole point of being a medical student, right? We get to try out different things. We get to learn different things. Even if we're not like planning to go into a certain field, there's so much wisdom we can get from that field. But then as I graduated and started practicing as a doctor, I realized that the specialty that I would choose would indicate what being a doctor would look like for me and what I would spend the most time doing as a doctor. And here, I don't particularly refer to like work-life balance, which is also important, but I mean like what's acts will I spend most of my time doing, in the office, in the hospital as a physician. And especially working in emergency medicine in the early months after I graduated, I noticed that, and this has been something that I had known about myself, but I kind of noticed the importance of it, that I just love spending time with patients. I love spending time with patients. I love listening them out, and not just their physical complaints, but what they are going through or what sort of environment they're coming from or how that is impacting them. And I like to walk with them throughout this journey. And I realized that I think like around that time that any other specialty that I would go into other than psychiatry, this would still be important, to spend time with patients, to listen to patients, to understand them, but they will simply be secondary versus in psychiatry, I imagine that this would be the primary thing that I will get to do. So we kind of jumped in the timeline. This realization came to me, I would say, in fall of 2021. So it was after I also joined Steed. And with that realization, I quit my job in emergency medicine and started working on, continue working on the exams so that I could start residency in the US, which was a challenging time, I would say, on its own. And I would also say it's the time that all, these uncertainties and anxieties have peaked in my life. But it's also the time that I had the conversation that I had just mentioned with my professor, which also gave me a lot of hope. So around this time, I started volunteering in a private clinic, one of my professors, a child adolescent psychiatry professors had, which was, I would say, a once in a lifetime opportunity. And it's a very unorthodox opportunity to have in Turkey. And I'm always like grateful for that anytime I just like think about it. So in her private practice, she obviously, with the permission of patients and families, allowed me to see patients with her. And that was just like a huge affirmation of what I was looking for in clinical care. And I just realized I love the act of I'm not gonna say understanding people, but trying to understand people. And just like putting that effort and to communicate and connect with them so that I could help them the best I can, or so that I they could let me or help me help them. So that was a very important and pivotal experience for me, and it also made me realize that I was indeed very interested in child adolescent psychiatry. I think even in working with adults, it has such an important place to understand what happens in the early life and how person went through like the neurodevelopmental stages. Um, so yeah, that experience helped me, gain more understanding of what I was going into, but it also gave me something to hold on to while I was working on the USMLE exams that I had to take for residency in the US. And then I took my exams around the summer of 2022, and I applied for residency that year. Um, and I would say the summer of 2022 was a very important part of my journey because just how I looked towards the future in the beginning of that summer versus the end of it was such a pivotal change regarding my general outlook, the hope that I had for future, and just generally the strength that I have to, go through something like applying for residency in the US, of which I will go into the details and what I mean by that in a sec. But this kind of ties into the initial point that I made in the very beginning of this conversation. Um, I would say that in the beginning of that summer, even though that I had, resigned from my job in emergency medicine, I was, starting to get this awesome exposure in the volunteer clinic. I still had um, a lot of anxiety in me and a lot of pessimism towards the future. And again, all the good things that were going on in my life, being part of Seed, um, and doing our IGMs, getting to volunteer, and all those stuff, those helped a lot. But I was still having a lot of struggles. So around this time, I also sought mental health support. And I think this is a very important thing to mention because even within like physicians and even within people who are psychiatrists or who has become psychiatrists to just seek out. And it was for me too. I was out there, saying that I wanted to become a psychiatrist. I was working for that, but it took me a very long time to seek the support for myself. And I eventually did it because my parents encouraged me a lot. They were like, hey, you are facing a very challenging time in your life. And you actually don't have to do this alone. And this is actually what you advocate for. So I would say like that summer of 2022 was a very pivotal time for me. And it was a pivotal time. Like what made it pivotal was the fact that I would say I also broke this internal stigma I had and sought mental health support for myself, which empowered me to actually pursue my full potential rather than, being discouraged by my anxieties or other things that I was struggling with. So I would say that's the second important takeaway to take away from this. There is no obviously, like, there's no stigma, like, there's stigma, but there's no shame in seeking out mental health care. But also, there is no shame in facing your internalized stigma as well. And I think that was like the part that found challenging the most. You know, it was easy to tell other people, hey, there is no shame. The stigma is false and it's mental health is healthcare. It was easy to tell that to other people. But when it came to myself, it was hard to admit that, oh, wait, I actually have internalized stigma towards this. I actually have, like, I don't know, maybe deep down I see it as admission of failure, or maybe deep down I'm afraid of facing the things that I will have to work on. Anything, but I would say that it was a very important experience for me to, grow as a psychiatrist, and that sort of lived experience that I gained, I see it come up in my practice today, and I'm ever so grateful for that, for having access to that, for overcoming that internal fear, and for having that social support that motivated and encouraged me to pursue that. So, by the way, feel free to interrupt me for any questions. I can talk, like, I like to talk. I mean, I like to listen, but the second thing I love is to talk. So, but if you ask a question, I will listen, because that's like the number one thing. And so this is summer of 2022. And I took my exams. I kept on volunteering in the private clinic, which actually lasted longer than we had both anticipated. Like, we just happened to work really well. And I happened to like it really well. And I would say the fall of 2022 was when I started my application for residency in the US. And basically, for people who are not familiar with it, the way that it works is, in the United States has this process called the match. And to participate in the match, this is a foreign graduate. It's a bit different for Americans, or people who study medicine in the US. But I had to take 2 exams that are called medical licensing exams, USMLEs, and an English exam to prove that I could speak English in a medical setting, and be certified by this organization, which is a very, like, lengthy process. Yeah, Dr. Joshkun.
Excuse me for interrupting, but
please.
You gave the permission. It's so nice to listen to you, just showing us your feelings. But why United States? Can I ask that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would say, so it kind of ties into the organization I mentioned in the beginning, like IFMSA. So I spent a lot of time there, and I mean, I spent a lot of the time of my day in that organization for several years. And I kind of got accustomed to a certain working culture that was, I would say, more open communication, less hierarchical, though I was like, my psychiatry experience in Turkey hasn't been that hierarchical either, but in general, just for the sake of the US, and just a culture of greater collaboration and solution orientedness. And I kind of, upon doing research and, like, just observations, I kind of had the impression that I would be able to recreate that sort of work environment in the US. And I was actually proven right. But the thing is, I would say I was proven right, because one huge difference is, in Turkey, the way, we get into residency is through this centralized exam that we all have to take. And it's a standardized exam, and we all take it. And that's quite literally the only thing. The program directors in Turkey, the people who coordinate psychiatry graduate education, they sometimes don't even have a say on how many residents they get to have in their program, rather than like, let alone choose who to get, which has its own like reasons. I mean, we try to be fair with our processes. We try to be transparent, and centralized exams are a very good way to do that in Turkey. But that said, now talking about the match, it's a process that requires, so what happens in the US is a process that it requires me taking all the exams and stuff, but that's only like the basics of what I had to do. So you have to build up your resume, and you know, gather your letters of reference. You write your motivation letters or personal statements, and then you submit these applications to tens of places. And they all evaluate that, you know, individually, all these programs, and they choose who to interview and who to, you know, select at the end based on what you provide them. So that's your whole experiences, you know, the things that you are passionate about, the things that you had worked on, the things that you are aspiring or planning to work on. And I would say just this difference in process was indicative of, if I end up in a program in the US by going through this process, that means that I will be very intentionally chosen by the people who will educate me. And this would also apply for all the other friends that I will share the learning experience with. And, you know, I'm not like, I will not say like the match is a perfect process or anything like that. And I definitely, like I said, see the benefits of the process we have in Turkey. But like just that premise of the differences and how much I had to give or got to give or got to share from myself, just to get to somewhere, was very indicative of what sort of working environment I would get in the US, and what sort of group, what sort of team I would end up in, if that makes sense. And yeah, I would say the inspiration to go to US kind of dated me, you know, being set on psychiatry, but it definitely skyrocketed like the whole effort, like all my efforts and all my initiatives definitely skyrocketed once I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a psychiatrist. This is what being a physician means to me. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does. Okay. Okay, thanks. Thanks for asking that, because like I think it is a very important thing to reflect upon. And I would say all reasons are valid. You know, some people, for them, it could mean, you know, financial mobility. And I would say that's valid too. You know, if my parents both grew up in villages and they had this upward mobility because they had good education through, you know, the Turkish state. And if another person, if another physician from somewhere else from the world, if they want to achieve the same thing for their children, that's like, I would say, a great reason as well. But those were my reasons generally. And I can happily say that at least so far, I don't know, 8 months into residency at this point, that my assumptions were proven right. It's when you know, I really appreciate all of my co-residents in my class. And I definitely feel that for me, it feels like we are this like group of friends that have been brought together to, you know, share this journey. And it's just something I really appreciate. So yeah, that was the reason that I chose and kept choosing and like pursuing residency in the US. Um, just to continue the timeline, again, feel free to interrupt any moment for questions. That was a great question. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Joshkun. So fall of 2022, I applied for the match. And so the way that the match works, I explained it a bit, but you go through all these like exams and get certified and everything. And that's the number one step. That's like the basic thing that you have to do. After that, you get your letters of references, personal statements. You write your personal statement, which is basically a letter of motivation, but it better be the best one that you have ever written in your life, because it's like a very important part of your application. And then you put your CV up there, and basically people just choose to interview you based on all that. And after they interview you, they put you up in a list, you put them up in a list, and there's this magical algorithm. I believe it's Dr. Barron. Correct me if I'm wrong or if this is an urban legend, but I believe the match algorithm has like the Nobel Prize, or like the mathematic equivalent of it, because of how amazing it is. I don't know. You're muted. Am I making this up? Am I confabulating this because it's
Yeah,
2:30
no.
a.m.?
So as a former training director, it's actually quite simple. It certainly has won no awards. What happens is the applicants rank their programs. So if you interview at 10 programs, you rank, and I always tell my residents, only rank the programs you want to go to, because once you match, you're obligated to go there. You can't say, oh, I think I'm going to go someplace else. So the applicants rank their programs. It's set up so that the applicants have the upper leg. So if you rank program X
Yeah.
as your first choice, they might rank you as their seventh choice. But if they have 8 slots, you've matched there. So the applicant matches to the program that they ranked highest. So if you rank program X as number 1, but program X didn't have you in their top 20 and they already filled, then it would go down to your second choice. So it's the algorithm is actually much simpler than you might have been told. It's you match with the program that has an open slot for you. So I've had residents who we literally had kind of down towards the bottom of our list, and doesn't mean they weren't good applicants, but for whatever reason. But if they ranked us high, then that's where they match. So it is set up to really benefit the resident. And once you match, that's considered a binding contract. You can't kind of back out unless you decide to go into another specialty. So I wish I could say we could take credit for this wonderful algorithm. It's really not. And it's been the same way for the last 50 years, even when I was a resident back in the 70s.
Yeah, it has quite the history. Yeah, that's quite the history. Thank you so much for that. That was actually a very elegant way to explain it. I would definitely spend another 5-minute tangent trying to explain that. But yeah, that's basically the match. And like the whole process prior to that is basically to, influence the programs on like how far, how up they will rank you. And at the same time, getting to know the program so that you can decide how up you can rank them. Anyway, so I did all that. And by March, they announced the results and I got into Yale Psychiatry. And afterwards, it's like, just I would say that I had an emotional catharsis, not the day I matched, but actually back in November when they first just sent me an invitation to interview. And I would say after that, like after I got that invitation, I kind of, for some reason, like, I kind of feel like I don't want to say I felt like confident that that's not the thing, but like I guess I had all the emotional reaction back then. The rest kind of felt like it happened as it was supposed to be. But nevertheless, like I was very happy. And after that, it was basically just trying to get my visa, orientation and onboarding, and starting intern year, which happened in summer of 2023. And the way that it works in the US is so I'm an intern right now, and if you are not studying in the US, which none of you are, as I did not as well, its intern year may refer to the last year of medical school for you. I would say it's kind of similar, although you are a full practicing doctor as an intern here, and you definitely have more responsibilities, but it's also different in a way that the clinical experience, at least in psychiatry, is not as varied across all medical specialties, but it's more psychiatry oriented. So this year I'm having half of my year as with psychiatry rotations and the other half with internal medicine and neurology rotations. I'm actually in my neurology rotation right now, and I just really enjoy it. I think it's just like a great and interesting field as well. Before I go on, I just saw there's a question. So Akash is basically asking a different version of Dr. Joshkun's questions, and just like to reiterate, like I said, like what motivated me was the feeling that I would get a work culture that is more compatible with how I work best in the US. And I basically got these assumptions from like the previous organizations I worked in, but also just based on like how the application processes work in the US versus like the differences outlined in Turkey. And I also want to highlight like the mention. So you're mentioning that you sense a different perspective on the future of a doctor. And I think that could mean a lot of things, right? Like that's a sentiment that many of us could relate to. In our countries, we are going into this field as young doctors, and it can be very challenging to have to navigate the system, but also just think where the system is even going. And there are a lot of issues. One, financial instability is one, safety while in a healthcare setting is another, and it's a very important and pertinent issue, at least in Turkey. Just the experience of being a physician in the healthcare system is a very important one. If you feel like you are burdened by administrative tasks, or you're not having enough social work related support, and you're very limited by the barriers the patient may be facing without adequate sources of support, that could be very challenging. So I would say, I would say these were not necessarily the reasons that I pursued this, but after, starting to practice here, I definitely do see a difference. Especially like I practice in the state of Connecticut, and I believe in the US this can vary from state to state, but there was this, I would say, prejudice or about the US before I came here about how vicious the healthcare system is. And Turkish people, and we are like in our part of the hemisphere, we can be very proud of our universal health coverage, which is something to be proud of. It is quite amazing. But at the same time, I think depending on the state and the institution that you work in the US, if you work in a nonprofit or you work in a state with good social security infrastructure, there is a lot of support for me, I feel, as a physician, in the sense of social work, in the sense of case management, where people can just like help me facilitate figuring out patient's the things that a patient is struggling with. Especially in psychiatry, my experience so far was every patient has their own social worker, just like they have their own psychiatrist, and social workers see patients every day just like we do, and we talk together on how to best support them. And this is such a huge difference in resources, because back in Turkey, the whole hospital, so something I kind of skipped on in this timeline. I also started psychiatry residency in Turkey before I came here, and this was around around the time I was interviewing for the US. I happened to get into I took the exam, and I happened to score high enough to get into a residency here, which was an amazing experience. It was a lovely program. But when I think about resources, like that hospital had just one team of social workers for every unit, versus here in Yale Psychiatric Hospital or any psychiatric unit, every patient has their own social worker that's round with us. And it's just like such a huge difference when it comes to patient care, I would say. And yeah, and just like thinking back on like comparing residency experiences, like my residency in Turkey, it was definitely a program that prioritized education, which is not always available. But despite that, I would see, you know, my professors and my program director just so burdened by all the bureaucratic and administrative structures that truly don't really understand how psychiatric healthcare should work. And here it's just like it is very different than that. Again, it's not perfect. It's definitely not. But there are a lot of great lessons and examples I'm seeing here that I feel like can be implemented. Ramin, I see you raise your hand, but I also see Dr. Barron made a comment in the chat. Okay, Ramin, go ahead.
No, I mean, yeah, as Professor Barron has mentioned, medicine has become more of business I think not only in the US, I think it's true probably worldwide as well, because I think it's a similar thing even here in Malaysia itself. Sorry for interrupting, Idil. You know, you can go on and on. I can see that you're very passionate about this, and it's something that you take very seriously. And I believe this is a very admirable thing for future psychiatrists as well. But I do want to sort of add on to what Akash has actually mentioned. It's something that I think I can relate to as well. I guess it's a thing more commonly in lower and middle income countries, I suppose, because it's odd, because you would think that being a doctor in a country is an essential part of community, but the job security over here is just not that great, actually, because of I'm not really sure of the reason, to be completely honest with you, but the way the system has been working and the way that junior doctors who are coming in have been overworked and underpaid, and there's many recent issues in Malaysia where there are there's a reduced influx of junior doctors, or where there's a high number of medical graduates, but only a small percentage of those are actually coming in for their service within the local medical community. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this, and how's the situation like in the US as compared to some of these lower and middle income countries? And in addition to your views, perhaps you can also hear from Professor Barron, Professor Sartorius, some of the other members. What are your experiences like? It would be nice to have a kind of global perspective.
That I think that's a really great point. And thank you so much for adding your valuable perspective on it. I can totally relate to that. I wouldn't say that I experienced the, same thing being from Turkey, but a general deflation of the job, or a general insecurity regarding what sort of future that you will have in a job, is something that has been kind of like spreading, I would say, across, I guess, countries. One thing, though, I want to mention is at least to compare, and this is also difference between the US and the Turkey too. And again, this is based on my brief observation of how medical education works here, is that in the US, so in most part of the world, I would say it's probably the same in Malaysia, common in Malaysia, Pakistan, and Turkey, is that our medical education aims to graduate general practitioners. Like when we we can go into residency, but the main, like the core competency of our like that's the number one thing. You are going to be a general practitioner. That's what the training aims for, and that's what it qualifies you for. What I observed here is that medical education here raises people to set themselves up for success to become good specialists. Again, this is a very like superficial and observation based on a very short time that I had so far here, but just from like the practice modalities, like people in the US, they don't graduate and become, they don't say like I will. So they may not go into residency, but that means they'll most probably not work in a clinical setting, but pursue other professional interests. But generally, there is, as far as I know, not a work modality where you graduate medical school and then you become a general practitioner. So I would say that's like a huge difference. So and this is a difference in the sense that there's like, yeah, every US grad must do to like to just continue with clinical practice. And also another difference is that medical school here is essentially a graduate school. So what we do is, at least what we do in Turkey is, we go to medical school right after high school in 6 years, and it's a master's level degree that we are offered at the end. And the way that it works in the US is that you do a bachelor's before, and then you go to medical schools for 4 more years. And I feel like that's maybe adds a more intentionality, if that makes sense, because it is a huge barrier to, like just go through school in a different topic first and like have your own degree and your own profession set, and then going through, taking the MCAT, which is the exam you have to take to enter med school in the US, collecting all the credits so that you could qualify to apply for med school. There's a lot of like purposeful acts that you need to do in between at like the ages of 21, 22, 24, which are like the ages that we actually graduate in med school here and become doctors. Now, obviously, like this difference is set by the needs that we have. I don't think it would, like, at least in Turkey, I don't think it would be better if medical school was a graduate school. I think it would just like add more barriers financially to people who are already could be struggling, and maybe it does in the US as well. I'm not certain. I'm not very certain, but those are like the main differences, I would say. And it's so you mentioned not like a small percentage of doctors coming back to their local communities for you. Do you mean like mandatory service?
Yeah, precisely that. Because I'm not sure. I mean, it's obviously evidently different everywhere, but in Malaysia, after we finish our medical school, we have to perform 2 years of compulsory service with the government, and only after completing these 2 years of compulsory service can you serve in the clinical setting as a fully fledged doctor. And only after then, it's an additional 2 years of permanent service in the government, where you can pursue the equivalent of residency, where we have two pathways. One is a parallel pathway, and one is through a master's program, where we can decide or pursue a specialty. But a lot of medical graduates are just giving up at that, first step, either not even entering into their compulsory service and just pursuing non-clinical practices, or they're quitting off halfway. They're dropping off halfway through their compulsory service because of a lot of issues within these 2 years.
Yeah, it's like I totally understand that, because at the same time, I think this was like a conversation that we had like 2 years ago when we were doing that. So we were doing this, Dr. Joshkun, you may remember, this meeting on brain drain. And basically the discussion was like, so there's this moral sort of like moral obligation to, serve your own community. But at the same time, doctors are leaving, and where does that leave like the communities behind? But I feel like that's like it in itself is like a problem, but it's also like more accurately just like the final symptom of a longer and deeper problem. And I feel like as physicians and just like providers in general, we can feel the need to carry a lot of the weight that the system does not carry, and kind of like make the impression that, and like subsequently make the impression that, oh, system is running really well, but it's just us doctors or us providers just don't want to like hang around, or I don't know, want some other more whatever. Which is a very unfortunate perspective because, you know, becoming a physician is something that you make a lot of, financial and intellectual investment in, and a lot of sacrifice in as well. You sacrifice your time, the time that you could spend with your family and friends. You've put in a lot of hard work. Again, it's a longer course of training than most bachelor degrees, so you start working later. So that's like, even if you have your tuition covered, that's a great financial investment. But most of it all, you invest your potential, and you invest your emotions in it. And I think it's very valid to expect that sort of intellectual and emotional satisfaction as a physician in your life. And I would say it's very valid to pursue that. And access to healthcare is a huge problem. I think we should work on making sure everyone has, access to healthcare and access to qualified providers. But that's a system, like that's something to be addressed in a system level. That's could be only done by making sure doctors are happy and hopeful. The providers, the people who practice healthcare are hopeful, happy, safe in the environments that they practice, and they are inspired to further practice there because they feel like, they could take their time to tend to their health, have enough resources to make sure that they also live a safe and comfortable life, but also have the means and the will to continue practicing and learning more so that they could actually practice standard care. Because that's also another moral injury, right? When we practice in this healthcare settings that depends a lot on us rather than building good systems, there's this moral injury. We're trying to do our best, but there's this also moral injury. Oh, I'm actually giving substandard care to this person because I don't have the resources. And I think that's like a very important thing that we don't often address, and it gets dismissed, and people can have this perspective of, doctors just seeking better conditions to work in as people seeking comfort, versus you just want to feel safe because the decisions that you make or like the care that you give is life-changing. So yeah, I would say, like, I personally think that's a very valid reason to, when you're deciding on the work environment that you want to work in. So yeah.
And I think that's a valid reason for people studying in Malaysia to take the USMLEs and head over and join you there. Could we perhaps hear some words of wisdom from Professor Sartorius? Sorry, Professor, I think you are still muted.
I have a recommendation for you, which is there is a book which was written by Dr. Luhrmann, Luhraman, Norman. She's a young psychiatrist who's been interested in anthropology. She's the daughter of a psychiatrist, and she writes about the American system seen from the point of view of an anthropologist. It's a nice book to read. And also, it's an interesting confrontation between her father and herself in ways of seeing the healthcare system. It's called In Two Minds, and you might wish to look at it at some stage. I think that we have, or at least for me, the number of topics which you have addressed is far too large, so it's very difficult to ask any specific question. And maybe at some stage, one could go into any one of those detailed topics to think more in more detail specifically what one could learn from the experience that you or other colleagues might have had. So these are my two comments which I have at present.
And what about other members of our floor? Perhaps Farhad, Gokche. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name.
I'd like to thank Dr. Idil for telling us about her perspective and her journey. As a practitioner working in Turkey, I think some of her insights were really valuable to me also. And some of the things she mentioned, I also understand her perspective and the things she mentioned. Overall, I want to thank her and I want to thank everybody for organizing such a valuable meeting for us. Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
And I also want to thank Idil because it's also like I'm at the end of my medical education, and sometimes I also write and ask some, I don't know, advices from Idil because I'm also planning to apply for residency for psychiatry in USA, and sometimes it can be like, when we start at education at university, it's actually a very soft game. You want to be a doctor, and actually you think that you will, take some exams, and that's all, and you will have perfect environment, and you will do what you have in your mind. But when you go and come to the end of your medical study, you see that it's not just like that. It has a lot of obstacles, a lot of hurdles that you need to manage, you need to plan, and that's why right now I feel insecure about that. In a lot of times, it's really hard to keep up at some points, but just have to. It's good to see some how can I say, some talk. Your talk is innocent. You share your deep feelings. Your, how can I say, true feelings. You didn't tell anything, you didn't try to decorate it and give us some pretty lies. And I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. That's very kind of you. And like I said, I want to reiterate, it's very the things that you are feeling in this early years, you guys are not alone in this. I was very intimidated by this process, and in no way, also don't want it, I want this to be this. I wanted this to be an open discussion. I think everyone has their own path, and I would not say, oh, what I did was the best. I think it was the best for me, and I'm so grateful for having the opportunities that I had, and being with the people that I'm with right now, and working on the things I'm passionate about. But there are many different paths that are just right for different people. And I would say knowing the challenges ahead and making informed decisions are important. And I was also very intimidated in the beginning, middle, and the end of it. I'm still intimidated by everything. But I think you just grow more comfortable with intimidation. And, my father had told me, ideal, it's like based on what I understand, this feels like a very uncertain, like it's not the most certain path, and certainly you don't know where you will end up at the end of it. But I can reassure you, if you go through the things that you will say you go through, you will definitely become a better and more grown version of yourself. And if I feel like that's something that's worth investing whatever you have in at this point of your life. So that had encouraged me. And I just want to like circle back to like the topic of this presentation today. It's, reflections from the beginning of a journey. And this is like I would say, fifth beginning of something. It's like I thought, starting medical school was the beginning of my journey, or becoming human rights director in this organization I was very passionate about was the beginning of my journey. Starting the USMLEs was the beginning of my journey, and or just getting match was the beginning. And I'm thinking not right now I'm at the beginning, and probably in a few years when I become a fellow, and after that, when I become an attending, I'll be like, I'm at the very beginning of things. And I don't know how you guys feel, Dr. Barron, Dr. Sartorius, Dr. Joshkun, if you still feel like, hey, I'm just beginning this thing, or but I think it used to feel like a burden, but now I realize that it's a tremendous blessing that we have in our profession, that we have this opportunity to have this lifelong journey of learning and being in the beginning of things.
Well, I think you made a couple of really important points that are worth highlighting very briefly. One is you mentioned about mentorship, but we've talked about that in the past. We have mentors throughout our career, and maybe they help us on that next journey. And you mentioned how mentors were so important to you, why you got interested in psychiatry. I really want to applaud and want everyone to understand you followed your heart. You found something that you were passionate about, and you pursued that. And I think that's something that kind of helps us get through these journeys that can be stressful at times. But if we're following our heart, which you obviously did, you talked about the burnout, which is a big issue in the U.S. We've got billions of dollars going into helping physicians. It's called the Breenac, who was an ER physician who committed suicide during COVID. But the idea that we're not alone, we're in this together, whether it's SEED or our colleagues in residency or our colleagues. And that's one of the things I've always loved about being in academia, is this idea that we're in this together to learn, to follow our passion. And then the thing I think that's so important is the joy in what we're doing. I can say that one of my early mentors was Professor Sartorius. When he taught me when he was working in New York how important it was that his best friends were his research friends. And that's what I found having a clinical career, that my friends are my colleagues. And I want to applaud, again, your openness and your honesty. But I will say that there are a lot of differences. So in the U.S., medical students graduate about $200,000 to $250,000 in debt. But when you graduate your residency, the mean salary for a resident right out of psych training in the U.S. for general is about $250,000 U.S. For child psychiatry, it's over $300,000 U.S. and some even more. So the economics are very, very different. And that it's not a matter of right or wrong, but I think because the economics are that way, it becomes more important to do what you've done. And that's follow your passion, stay excited about what you're doing. Don't focus on the negative, but what a blessing that we have to be able to have these careers and to follow our heart. So I just want to underscore that. And for me personally, and I'm fairly well along in my career, over 40 years in it, when people ask me what's been the best year of my career, I say, I think it's the year coming up.
Maybe just one other comment, which some of you may be thinking, and you are giving a good example of going away from your own country, from your own setting and culture into another culture. I mean, the United States is attractive because there are many wonderful people there and everything else. But before you get seduced by what is there, think what you will lose over here. because there are so many things that are not establishable very easily. School friends, for example, remain friends for life. They are not created when you are 40 or when you're 25 or 30. And many other things which are not repeatable in another country are very important. So in making the decision where you are going to go, yes, follow your passion, but think at the same time, what am I going to lose because I am leaving, and what am I going to get? Usually people get seduced by what I'm going to get.
Yeah.
Wonderful new opportunities, I don't know, skiing in California waters and going all sorts of things. All of this will you, yes, you'll get. But think at the same time, what have I lost? What will I lose if I go away from my country? What I've lost in terms of emotional connections, in terms of knowledge, in really complete command of the language, and so many other things that you will just have to drop. They disappear. So I think that, yes, follow your passion, but be careful not to lose too much when you follow it. Think a little bit of whether you could perhaps do just as much in your own country as you would do in some other place where your heart is taking. It's easy to describe the advantages of another country, but it's very important to become aware of the tremendous support that our own place is often giving us.
I think, as with anything in medicine, we have to outweigh the risks and the benefits. And right now, unfortunately, I would love to hear at least another 2 hours of the sharing and these discussions that we've been having. But our time, we are quite short on time. We have actually exceeded it by a little bit, but that's perfectly fine. Perhaps we can continue this discussion at a future meeting. I know we've said it a lot, but I think this is one of the topics that I would really love to discuss more on in the future as well. So if there are no further comments, perhaps we can conclude for now.
Dr. Joshkun's blessing.
With Dr. Joshkun's blessing.
With your blessing, Bulent.
With your blessing, Bulent.
Yeah. I remembered Dr. Ruiz after the earthquake in 1999. With my family, we thought of going abroad, at least for some time. We were rationalizing that our child would benefit out of that, being away from the disaster area. I remember I had written to Dr. Ruiz. With him, we had worked together in Baylor. He said, don't move from where you are. Just stay and try your best. After wisdom of Dr. Sartorius, I recalled that, yes, going abroad helps. But if it is at a visiting and gaining some insight, one can do his or her best in the area, in his or her own area, I suppose.
With that, I think we can confidently conclude the meeting for today. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you so much, Dr. Idil, for your wonderful sharings and really first-hand experience on being a resident, a psychiatry resident in the US.
Thank you so much for having me. Sorry, it was just such a pleasure to see you all again. It's like, yeah, thank you and I just want to thank you all for also being, by my side throughout this journey as well. I really appreciate all the support and mentorship and all the things that I have learned from you guys. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there.